Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a guest tonight, Mr. Lee Berger. Hey, Lee.
Hi, Paul.
And Casper's here. We have Quilt Man and his son Tijuana are on the show here tonight. They're going to play some music along with Mark Shark, a couple of the bad dogs from John Trudell's band. Thank you guys for coming. And we've got a little bit of hemp news, some film clips, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
I feel the force.
All right, our first hemp news story tonight is a national U.S. story. More than 100 Native American tribes have reportedly contacted Foxberry Farms, a company which says it's building the nation's first marijuana cultivation facility on tribal land, over the past month, expressing interest in the cannabis industry. There's been a surge of interest since the Federal Justice Department's announcement late last year that tribes are free to grow and sell cannabis on their lands, as long as they follow specific guidelines. According to Foxberry CEO Barry Brotman, whose company also works with tribes to build and operate casinos, he says, quote, "I really underestimated this. So many tribes are wanting to do this right now," end quote. Foxberry and the Denver-based United Cannabis Corp recently signed a contract to construct a huge medical marijuana farm on the Pino Lavale Pomo Nation's ranch in Northern California. The 2.5-acre, $10 million installation will cultivate, process, and sell marijuana under the United Cannabis brand, according to Brotman, who said the operation would also employ 50 to 100 people with preference to tribe members. Tribes across the country could experience an economic boom, according to Brotman, who's also negotiating with 3 other California-based tribes, as well as groups in 7 other states. Out of Los Angeles, cannabis use is inversely associated with incidences of bladder cancer in males, according to epidemiological findings published in the February issue of the journal Urology. Investigators at the Kaiser Permanente Los Angeles Medical Center's Department of Neurology assessed the association of cannabis use and tobacco smoking on the risk of bladder cancer in multi-ethnic cohort of more than 80,000 men aged 45 to 69 years old over an 11-year period. The researchers determined that cannabis use was associated with a decreased risk of bladder cancer. By contrast, tobacco use was associated with an increased risk of cancer. According to the study, quote, "After adjusting for age, race, or ethnicity, and body mass index, using tobacco only was associated with an increased risk of bladder cancer, hazard regression of 1.52, whereas cannabis use was only associated with a 45% reduction in bladder cancer incidence," the investigators reported. Subjects who reported using both tobacco and cannabis possessed a decreased risk of cancer compared to those subjects who used tobacco only. The studies the first indicate that cannabis use may be inversely associated with bladder cancer. The authors concluded, quote, "In this multi-ethnic cohort of 82,050 men, we found that cannabis use alone was associated with a decreased risk of bladder cancer. Men who used tobacco alone were 1.5 times more likely to develop bladder cancer when compared with men who did not use tobacco or cannabis. However, among men who used both substances, this risk of bladder cancer was mitigated. This represents a cause and effect relationship. This pathway may provide new opportunities for the prevention and or treatment of bladder cancer," end quote. In 2009, Brown University researchers similarly reported that moderate long-term use of marijuana was associated with a reduced risk of head and neck cancers in a center cohort involving over 1,000 subjects. Investigators further reported that marijuana use modified the interaction between alcohol and cigarette smoking, resulting in a decrease of head, neck, and squamous cell carcinoma risk among moderate smokers and light drinkers, and an attenuated risk among the heaviest smokers and drinkers, end quote. The full text of this study, the association between cannabis use and the risk of bladder cancer, results from the California Men's Health Survey, appears in this month's Urology. From Ottawa, Canada, the administration of nabilone, a synthetic cannabinoid, mitigates the frequency and intensity of trauma-related nightmares in military personnel suffering from treatment-resisted post-traumatic stress, according to clinical trial data published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology. Investigators from the Canadian Forces Health Services Group and the Operational Trauma and Stress Support Center in Ottawa assessed the efficacy of nabilone, an FDA-approved selective CB1 agonist, versus a placebo over a 16-week period in a cohort of Canadian military personnel diagnosed with PTSD. Nabilone administration was associated with greater likelihood of nightmare suppression and generally well-being as compared to the placebo. The study's authors wrote, quote, "In this small sample, nabilone capsules, or NAB, provided significant relief for military personnel with PTSD, indicating that it shows promise as a clinically relevant treatment for patients with nightmares and a history of non-response to traditional therapies," end quote. In 2009, Canadian Forces Health Services study similarly reported that adjunctive treatment with nabilone was associated with nightmare cessation and a significant reduction in nightmare intensity in a cohort of 47 PTSD patients with treatment-resistant nightmares. Full text of this study, the efficacy of nabilone, a synthetic cannabinoid, in the treatment of PTSD-associated nightmares, appears in this month's edition of Psychoneuroendocrinology. That's the end of our Hip News segment now. We've got some music from a quilt man, Mark Sharp, T. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll have them back at the end of the show. Welcome to the show, Lee. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Paul.
How are you doing? Sounds like you got a little frog in your throat there.
Yeah, I'm
been suffering from seasonal illness.
I was ill yesterday, and it affected my throat, but I still have enough of a voice for your show, I hope.
Yeah, you're perfectly understandable.
Thanks.
So what do you think about and good to see you, Casper.
Thank you. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. If you have questions or comments for us tonight, you can call us at 503-288-4442. That's 503-288-4442. We'll be taking calls right up the top of the hour. So for our audience members who don't know, you're an attorney. You've been working in cannabis reform for a long time.
Yep, long time coming. Seeing 91 pass this year and achieving that reform, the most reform anywhere in the country to date.
Yeah,
it was really
a lot better than the law that was passed in Washington or Colorado by far.
It certainly seems so, and the interesting thing now is, what's the legislature going to do, and what's the Liquor Control Commission going to do, and I've been practicing law for 32 years, and I practiced primarily criminal law for 30 years, and about 4 years ago, I started transitioning my practice towards advising cannabis-related businesses. and I was concerned I would be bored with it, and so far not so boring. It's fast changing. It's just an exciting transitional time with the legislature in session and with the Liquor Control Commission holding these listening tours. I want to urge your viewers, Paul, to watch to show up at these listening tours that the Liquor Control Commission is doing. I went to their meeting here in Milwaukee last week, and they seemed sincere about wanting to gauge the sentiment of the people statewide.
So how
Initially,
many people?
I was concerned because they ran out to Baker City and to
Right, and
Pendleton.
Pendleton were the first two, not the
no.
places that they noted had voted against Measure 91.
But there were large turnouts in Salem and Eugene, and next week I think they're in Ashland and Klamath Falls, and it's an unusual kind of a entity. There's a 5-member commission.
Are they all there at these listening tours?
I think so, and
How was it structured?
I haven't been to it because it hasn't been to Portland yet, and
Okay, you went to the one in
busy.
Milwaukee, though?
There was a meeting of the Liquor Control Commission.
Oh yeah,
was
at their
kinda like
headquarters there in Milwaukee.
Right. It was kind of an informational hearing where, kind of like, Paul, at the legislature when they take invited testimony and have an informational hearing. It was
Sure.
It was like that, but it gave you a good sense of where they're coming from because they had a panel of law enforcement, somebody from the Sheriff's Association, somebody from the Chiefs of Police, somebody from the League of Cities, Association of Counties, somebody from the District Attorneys Association, had an industry panel, and an advocate panel, I guess, with the Chief Petitioner, Anthony Johnson, and Amy Margolis from the Growers PAC, Norris Monson from Open Vape, and Don Morris from the Oregon Cannabis Business Council, and somebody who I'm sure I'm forgetting. But as a normal lawyer for all these years too, I've been practicing for 32 years, but I've been focusing on ending prohibition for just the last 20, so about a decade or so less than you, Paul, I'm guessing. It's disappointing that they're not reaching out to consumers. They're not asking what do consumers think about this, and I am representing, and I speak with, and I advise consumers, and I am a consumer, and I speak with, and I represent, and I advise industry, and you can do both, and I just think there's not good public policy unless everybody's heard from. In that regard, on Monday at 1 o'clock in Salem in hearing room E, the House Health Care Committee is going to be hearing a bill that would it's an e-cig bill, basically. It's electronic. They're trying to treat electronic cigarettes like tobacco in terms of placement and sales and whatnot, but they add vaporized cannabinoids to the list. And,
oh, really?
And they include it as a prohibition under the Clean Air Act, which would make it so you couldn't use it in a lounge, for example. Would make it so you couldn't use it in your place of employment. You couldn't use it within 10 feet of doors of the building, and
Just like tobacco smoke.
just like tobacco. And it's an unfortunate kind of prejudice that, as I understand it, has to exist in part because there was a study about formaldehyde that wasn't really based in science, and from another source I'm told that the issue has to do with in the extraction of the oil, whether it's nicotine or cannabis, if you add if you use a certain component, then that's what causes the formaldehyde, as well as the increased heat. But the heat at which an e-cigarette burns is higher than the heat at which so if you, like me, enjoy a vape pen, then I encourage you to show up in Salem Monday at 1 o'clock and sign up and let the committee know that you're not endangering children by your use. And
So that's Monday at 1 o'clock in which hearing room?
it's hearing room E at
Hearing room
the
Senate side.
yeah, I was going to say at the legislature.
Yeah, in the
it's
state
kind of towards
capitol.
in the state capitol.
Right
yes,
in the
sir.
back once you go past the rotunda. If you're coming
Once
in
you go
front of it.
past the rotunda, you go through the information area, you go through this big lobby, and I think it's the first room on the left. Does that
Yeah.
sound right?
Yeah, and there's some display cases there. They're right between the display We do take viewer phone calls. We have a couple standing by. Let's go ahead and take one of those phone calls. Welcome to the show, caller.
Hello? Is this
Hello.
me?
Hello.
That's good?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Barely.
Caller, you have to speak up, son.
Oh, I was calling to see what people are going to do to get ready for the supposed date of January 2016. What are people doing for getting their permits, for their license? It should have been 2 weeks after the election, as we both know, and then it came up July 15th or something. Now it's January because of the OLCC. So what are the growers and the concentrate people all going to do?
So I think he's asking, Lee, I'm going to let you address that, is what are people doing to get ready for January? And since you're business oriented toward cannabis business, you want to tell our
Well,
audience?
the thing that people are doing, I think, is
January, I think it's noted that that's when they're going to start taking applications for these new Measure 91 stores.
well, actually, they're good. Well, January 4th of 2016.
Oh, okay.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, if we
Yeah,
could.
please do.
There's really two main parts to the law, to Measure 91. The one part is, effective July 1st, possessing less than an ounce everywhere, so long as it's not in public view, is not a crime, is not a violation, it's legal. Effective July 1st, Oregonians who live more than 1,000 feet away from a school can cultivate up to 4 plants, and whether they live within 1,000 feet of a school or not, they can have up to 8 ounces of buds. They can have 72 ounces of infused liquid and 30 ounces of infused solid and an ounce of oil, and it's not a crime. They can take less than an ounce of flowers to a they can freely share that, and it's not a crime.
Now, there's
And I
a point in
mention
the
that
law that
because-
has 2 different dates.
And I
You
mention
know?
that because people forget, I think, that the point about Measure 91 wasn't about creating an industry. The point about Measure 91, like the point about OCTA over the years, was to free and legalize marijuana and cannabis and hemp. And the industry creation is the means by which that freedom can exist, because it's the means by which enough people would vote for it so we could change the law. So what does the law say? It says that effective January 4th of 2016, they have to accept applications for the 4 kinds of licenses that they're going to issue. The Liquor Control Commission does. 4 licenses are producer licenses, processing licenses, wholesale licenses, and retail licenses. There's been Tom Burns, who had been running the medical marijuana dispensary program, has gone over to the Liquor Control Commission to run the implementation of 91. And he said publicly a couple of things. One thing he said is, if they can, they're going to start sooner than January 4th. Another thing he said publicly is that the first licenses are going to go to the growers, because we're not going to make the mistake that they made in Washington, where the stores opened and on day 2 the shelves were empty,
Yeah, or
That's-
even a few hours later.
or even a few hours later. What those licenses are going to look like, and whether there's going to be limitations on canopy size or number of plants, or like there is in Washington State where they have a 3-tier system, or whether it's going to be like in Colorado where it's more open-ended, remains to be seen. And then under 91, the production is taxation occurs on the producer. It's $35 an ounce for the flowers, and $10 an ounce for the leaf, and $5 for a start. When it's transferred from the producer to a processor, wholesale or retailer, you can be vertically integrated, have all 4 licenses. You can have more licenses than 1. So what are people doing? What people are doing is they're trying to figure out what's likely to happen. And there's a lot of uncertainty because the legislature, particularly the chair of the Joint Committee on Implementing 91 has said, at least to the Oregonian editorial board, that she views 91 as a suggestion. And
Yeah, that seems rather, disingenuous. I mean, it's not just a suggestion. I think people knew what they were voting for.
well, I think that she's coming around as she's hearing that from lots of folks, Paul.
Good.
And
good.
I'm really hopeful that, but there is going to be some tinkering. And for example, there's a lot of uncertainty among growers, and the best advice I can give is I think that it's going to be unlikely that either for medical or for adult use that you'll be able to cultivate in an urban residential area. Beyond that, it's important that people monitor, and there are, in addition, I've been going to legislature since '99, and but there are actually these political action committees that have formed. There's a Growers PAC here in Portland, and in Williams, there's the Sun-Grown Growers Guild. So there's at least
There's several PACs forming.
But around cultivation, those are the two main ones, I think, unless you know about something.
No, I don't know about it.
There is several though. There's the Oregon Cannabis Business Council. They've organized and have hired a lobbyist. Anthony Taylor is back on behalf of Compassionate Oregon. I've been working with him some on a bill to help fix part of the OMA. But the answer, I think, to the caller's question is, it's important to stay involved. It's important to
Engage with the OLCC, obviously.
engage with the OLCC and just to keep track of and monitor what's going on. And, there are at least half a dozen lawyers who are doing what I'm doing in terms of advising people. And I think part of any business's due diligence is contacting and speaking with a lawyer who can advise you about, what looks likely to happen or not.
We have several people that are watching us online, and we've got a couple of questions. One of them is, how will Measure 91 be enforced in those counties that are opting out? What's your take on that, Lee?
Well, that's a good question, and it's also in somewhat of a state of flux. Section 58 about Measure 91 is what we call a preemption section. It says that
You're supposed to put it up for a vote.
Well, no, I don't mean that, Paul. 60 says that.
Oh, okay.
Section 58 says any provision that's inconsistent with 91 is repealed.
Mm-hmm.
So what counties need to do if they want to opt out under Measure 91 is, you're absolutely right, they need to hold an election. That's what we wrote into
which
the
is
law.
Section 60.
Right, Section 60 of the measure. The League of Cities and the Association of Counties have been very active, particularly in Josephine and Jackson counties, in promoting the idea, basically, that municipalities can do whatever they want. And the unfortunate thing is they're using this legal idea called local control or home rule power. And local control and home rule power is kind of like, now we've got 4 states in the District of Columbia that are independent laboratories working on stuff.
There's that section that says it supersedes charters and ordinances.
Home rule power is supposed to be where they would say, like, well, it's okay here in Milwaukee, you could be 500 feet. Doesn't have to be 1,000 feet. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is they're using it as a cover for their bigotry. They don't like us. They don't like our kind.
Yeah.
They don't want weed in their town, and they think they ought to be able to not have it just because they don't like it. And what I tell them when I'm down there talking to these city councils is, there was a time in the South when municipalities had 2 water fountains, one for whites and one for coloreds, and there's no way they were just going to have one water fountain. Well, I'm telling you, marijuana is going to be the water fountains in Oregon. If we can mobilize and organize and continue to put pressure on legislators to resist what the League of Cities Association of Counties is doing. League of Cities Association of Counties came to the legislature wanting a ban. It went through the Senate. They took out the ban. It went through the House, and they put the ban back in. Went to the House Rules Committee, and they created the moratoriums, Paul, the May to May things, the ones that expire. A lot of municipalities, by the way, have treated that honestly. Beaverton, for example, repealed their moratorium early and has time, place, and manner restrictions. Washington County, unincorporated Washington County is the same way. But the League of Cities and Association of Counties is going into court in places like Josephine County saying, oh no, this isn't expressly preempting us, and if it's not express, we can do it. And they've persuaded one judge down there that they could. And that case is on appeal. I'm in court in Medford with Andrea Adams and the Greenery from Phoenix, a medical dispensary that, by the way, is not interested in becoming an adult use dispensary. But they've been shut down and enjoined, and the city of Phoenix is arguing in court that the Controlled Substances Act preempts the entire House Bill 3460 and presumably can make the same argument about 91. So they are out there aggressively trying to stop the spread of freedom, to
So
stop
these are the Jackson
that you and I have
County
devoted
authorities.
decades
Yeah.
of our lives to try and achieve what 56% of the voters approved. And
Right.
and I appreciate the opportunity to vent that here. Thank you.
I have a
Thank
question.
you for doing it. Go right ahead. Cash.
Well, there are a lot of people who are enjoying the new marijuana businesses that are springing up. We got new hemp businesses coming out, medical marijuana coming out. We got a lot of growers now, farmers, and there are still people sitting behind bars for the use of marijuana now. I've said that when we ended the Korean War and the Vietnam War, we brought our prisoners home. Why can't we get our prisoners of this war home?
That's an excellent question, Casper. And I was encouraged to note that although the agenda has changed for Monday night's meeting of the Joint Committee on implementing 91, that's an issue the committee seems interested in taking up.
Good.
And I think what it would involve would be, there's at any given time about 100, I think almost entirely men in Oregon prisons solely on marijuana-related convictions. And I think what the legislature is likely to do is to pass a bill that if you're in custody on something that under 91 wouldn't have been a felony, wouldn't have been able to go to prison, that your sentence would be reviewed and you could be released. I think that's about the best we can hope for from the legislature.
I'd hope
The
so.
governor, just to finish the thought, the governor has the pardon power, and one thing I've been thinking about doing, and I'm waiting to see what the legislature does, is getting involved with my friend and colleague Bradley Steinman started law students for sensible drug policy at the law school here in Portland at Lewis and Clark. And I was thinking about going to them and training those folks to do pardons and appeals to apply to Governor Kitzhaber or whoever the governor is, given how things are right now, to pardon or commute the sentences of the prisoners.
But I want to make a brief comment about Kitzhaber's rather insane idea to cut that 8 ounces.
I think, Paul, it goes back to the disrespect that modernly politicians have to the initiative process. In 1999, when we were at the legislature after passing the Medical Marijuana Act, a conservative tax reform activist named Kevin Mannix was the chair of the Judiciary Committee. John Sajo and I had worked up a bill that would have been a joint recommendation from the Oregon legislature to Congress that they reschedule marijuana. Now, Mannix was and is no fan of marijuana, medical, adult use, hemp, none of it. But he knew that Vox Populi, Vox Dei, that the voice of the people is the voice of God and that it's to be respected. It's a coextensive branch. It's a coextensive branch of the legislature under Article 4 of our state constitution. He let the bill go to the floor. Joanne Bowman, at the time was her name, carried the bill to the floor, and we lost, but we were able to get a vote, and we were able to use that vote later in deciding who to support and who to oppose, and we were successful, actually, in getting voted out. One of the guys who voted against the rescheduling proposal, whose district had voted for the Medical Marijuana Act and against the recriminalization of less than an ounce in '98.
One thing I do find to be interesting is the governor, whose girlfriend, likes growing marijuana. I've got a lot of friends who are in the marijuana movement. Not one of them that I know of is being investigated by the FBI.
The governor's wife is. That's a good point. We have a number of people standing by on the telephone. Let's go ahead and take one of those telephone callers. Welcome to the show, caller.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hey, how you doing? My opinion is instead of having OLCC govern medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, we need to establish our own commission for marijuana, like the OMCC, and get all that political crap that's already been made
by an entity, because marijuana is not an alcohol product. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, we
And
tried to do that
furthermore,
with Measure
why would
80 in 2012. We got 47% of the vote, but a different model was chosen, and that's what we've got on the table.
Well, it's, you know,
know what
Paul,
I'm
that I
saying?
supported Measure 80, and
Thank
I
you.
agree
Yeah.
with the caller that we'd be better off with a marijuana commission. Frankly, we'd be better off with no commission. We'd be better off with a constitutional amendment that just allows cultivation,
Yeah.
possession,
Well,
and
they're not gonna
transfer.
allow us to do that.
But the real politics of it is that to re-legalize even just an ounce anywhere required a lot of non-consumers votes. A lot of people who irrationally, but nonetheless, are honestly afraid about marijuana. And if you tell them that, well, listen, we understand about you being afraid. We understand about your concerns about how's it going to be regulated. What about we give it to the agency that covers the most dangerous drug there is, alcohol. People die from alcohol consumption. People it's a cause of domestic violence, and people get in accidents. We'll let the people who are controlling alcohol control us. Would that make you less fearful of having a regulated system? And it worked.
And it got 9% more than we did in 2012. There's no doubt about that.
There's two different entities. Let's establish a commission for regulating marijuana and go from there and deal with the federal government like they did with the alcohol, okay?
All right. Well, thank you for your opinion, sir, and thanks for calling in.
And cat and mouse.
We have another caller standing by. Welcome to the show, caller. Hello, caller.
Is that me, Paul?
I think so, yes. Go ahead.
Paul?
Yes.
Yes.
Casper? Listen, what I was wondering was,
We hear
how are they going to show preference to the growers that there are now?
In terms of licensing, you mean?
In terms of licensing, is there going to be any preferences for medical growers already? And how are they going to separate the two, the medical and the? Can I have my 4 plants outside plus my 8 inside?
No. No. I think where the question comes up is, well, I understood the caller's question to be, at my home, if I am a medical grower and I'm an adult use grower, could I have a total of 10 plants, 6 plants for medical and 4 plants for adult use? And I think the answer to that question is no. I think you could have one or the other. The more bigger question that's going on is, there's a bill that you should take a look at. It's House Bill 2676, and it proposes licensing and regulating medical, commercial cultivation and processing, extraction for oil through the Liquor Control Commission. And there are concerns about the way that it was drafted, and it seems to cut off people who would still want to just grow for patients and be able to deliver the excess to the dispensaries. And I can tell you that people who are well-intentioned are working at fixing that problem. Ultimately, where it's going to wind up is less clear, but the Growers Pact certainly is pushing hard that there be some ability for the current commercial medical cultivators and processors to be able to get a license without have to cultivate on behalf of patients who own the medicine.
Who's going to follow up on that? Go around and count the plants at all the homes?
The police.
Well,
If somebody complains, I guess, or the police come across it.
the hope and expectation is that, well, there's a couple of things. One thing is, what makes it the most dramatic criminal law reform or drug policy law reform for cannabis is that if instead of having 4 plants, you have 8 plants, that's a misdemeanor. If instead of having 8 plants, you have 16 plants, it's a felony.
You know, that's the only thing about Colorado's law that actually is better than Oregon's, is you can have 6 plants there per household, and you can have whatever those 6 plants produces. You're not limited to you know, hey, plants, you got to stop growing. You can only have 8
Well,
ounces now.
I'd be
you know?
glad to share with you the backstory on that, Paul.
And is that 4 plants per household in Oregon? Am I correct?
Yeah, the 4 plants per household is in Oregon, and it's limited to 8 ounces. The 6 plants and all you can grow is in Colorado.
Yeah, right.
There was exit polling in Colorado that showed that that provision almost cost the election there. And as you know, the police, particularly in Southern Oregon, which, by the way, has undergone a dramatic change recently. I don't know.
Thank
if you-
goodness. Thank
About
goodness.
Mike. Well, yeah, Mike Winters was the sheriff for Jackson County, and he Corey Falls, who was the deputy chief in Ashland, beat him in an election. It's going to be a sea change in enforcement in Southern Oregon.
Yeah.
But there are growers, I'm told, who can, pull 10, 12, 15 pounds from a plant. or
I've been
5
known to do that.
I say, yep.
Yeah, I know.
So it's hard to sell the idea that this is a well-regulated system where there's no leakage out of the
Regulated
industry,
stream,
the
yeah.
regulated stream, and if that's what's going to happen. We originally had 8 plants and 16 ounces, I think, and then when the 91 was introduced to the legislature in 2014, in exchange for the endorsement from Norm Frank and Mark McDonald, 2 former assistant prosecutors here in Portland, we reduced it to 4 and 8. So
For the medical? Is it for the medical that
no,
way?
sir, for the adult
can I
use.
still have any patients that I need?
Paul was asking how come we don't have 6 and all you can grow.
Well, I was
and
just saying
'cause
it's
of
better
guys
in
like Paul.
Colorado on that regard.
Anything
mean-
new on the on Colorado's neighbors, taking them to the Supreme Court?
Well, they filed a lawsuit in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to decide whether to hear the case. Even Nebraska and Oklahoma filed a lawsuit against Colorado, and it's like in Southern Oregon, it's a preemption claim.
You think the court will hear it?
Well, I'm not sure, but I do have some good news about that. I have been in touch with the Attorney General's office in Oregon. The Attorney General's office is in close touch with Colorado Attorney General's office, not so much with Washington. They get where the better law is, just like we do. And I don't have any written assurances, but I'm guessing if the case goes forward, that the Oregon Attorney General's office will be a part of it.
Good.
Just this week, in a case that our friend Brian Michaels from Eugene had in the Court of Appeals about a denial of a return of medical marijuana, the Attorney General's office, in response to a question from the court about what about this Attorney General Opinion 12-1 that says that police don't have to return marijuana because the federal law preempts that section of the Medical Marijuana Act, did not enforce that in this case with Brian. They stepped back from that. It's not a complete repudiation of it, which is what I've asked for, but it's just a good sign that our Attorney General, Ellen Rosenblum, gets it about medical, gets it about adult use, wants to do this right, and is prepared to stand and fight for Oregon's law when others.
Well, sir, I'm sorry, I didn't get your first name in the beginning.
My
but
first
am I
name is
hearing that
Leland, actually, but I go by Lee.
for the-
I like to be Leland on the TV because there's another Lee Berger in Portland, a court reporter, and she doesn't like getting calls from patients or faxes
There's your
from the
name.
police department.
It's
Leland
under
Berger.
me, but,
There you go.
If we just move it over that way. But anyway,
Paul?
we have a
These are
little video
callers
clip
saying
we're going to run right now, and we'll be right back after this video clip. Stay tuned. Tune in.
And from e-cigarettes now to marijuana. 56% of voters decided to legalize pot in Oregon, but now many find themselves fighting in support of Measure 91 all over again.
In fact, several lawmakers have offered up bills that could drastically change how legal pot would work. That has many people saying, keep out of it. K2 Stephen Mayer is in Southeast Portland, and Stephen, they say those changes would go against the will of the voters.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Deb and Steve. Measure 91 set up basic rules for how to enforce recreational marijuana here in Oregon, leaving the OLCC to sort out the finer details when it comes to sales and enforcement. But now many are worried they won't even get that chance.
There's nothing more important to Leah Maurer than the health and safety of her 3 kids.
Okay, I'll sit on your lap.
The stay-at-home mom knows there's a lot to worry about these days, but she was hoping her kids getting their hands on pot wouldn't be one of them.
I felt like it was time to bring it up out of the criminal market, put it in the hands of the law, let the law regulate it, let it only be dispensed to adults where it's going to be tested.
She was an outspoken campaigner for Measure 91, but now she's worried lawmakers will tamper with the legislation she helped pass so much that it will defeat the whole purpose.
It's frustrating when, I read the law so carefully. I said, this is it. I support this law. I support it as a citizen. I support it as a mother. And I don't want to see any of these last-minute changes happening.
One of her biggest concerns, Senate Bill 542. It allows cities and counties to ban pot without putting the idea up to a vote of all citizens like Measure 91 called for.
I would be fearful that if counties outright ban it and don't give the voters a choice on it, that there would still be criminal activity. I really do feel that children and teenagers are much safer having it above ground in a regulated market and not in the hands of a criminal market.
What's really important about this...
So she and other supporters went on the offensive today, hoping to stall those bills and convince lawmakers to respect the will of voters.
And the OLCC has only just begun studying how they're going to implement Measure 91. They still have a lot to figure out. So Maurer says that's just another reason it's way too early to start making changes. And guys, I reached out to some of the lawmakers who have proposed some of those changes, but they're wrapped up in legislative hearings all day long, so I haven't heard back yet. But of course, we'll keep you updated as the story continues to develop. Stephen Mayer, K2 News.
Continue to watch this process unfold. Stephen, thank you.
All right, we have some callers who've been standing by. Welcome to the show, caller. All right, not that one.
That was a DEA agent from the Canadian border probably trying to get through.
Let's take the next call. Welcome to the show, caller.
Hello, Paul?
Yes.
Hey, I was just wondering, I live in Washington State, actually on the Canadian border, but I won't disclose any further information. But I just want to know what your thoughts are on the hopes of a drop in recreational prices in Washington, where I live, and what are your thoughts on any regulation they may impose on medical cannabis?
You mean in Washington State?
Yeah, Washington State, correct.
Yeah, well, they don't have regulations on medical cannabis in Washington State. The legislature
I guess
tried to pass a law, but then the governor line item vetoed it to make it, non-effective. That was Christine Gregoire.
Right. Yeah, I just mean in lieu of the new recreational cannabis that they have around.
So,
are they going to see further restrictions on medical cannabis, such as having a registry or anything like that?
There are a lot of talk in the Oregon legislature and in the Washington legislature about merging the markets, especially in Washington State. But it's a process that goes on in the state capitol, and we have input there. We can go to our legislators and urge them to respect medical marijuana patients and allow them to have access to the medicine that works so well for them, as our studies noted at the beginning of the show. So we just have to stay engaged in the political process wherever you're at, whether it be Oregon or Washington, and let the legislators know that we're watching, and they should heed our input.
Yeah, thank you. I just I'm very concerned because I've had medical cannabis for 2 years, and it's just kind of, my lifeline, and if anything happens to that, and the ease of access is the best part about it, because the recreational prices are just boring.
They're prohibitive. It's what, $700 an ounce up there, right?
Yeah, something like that. It gets up there. It's pretty terrible.
Yeah, and the quality's questionable as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the medical quality up here, and there's a lot of patient interactions. Just specifically the concentrates that I get, they're just it's to get it at say if you were going to a recreational store and in Bellingham, sometimes you actually have to join a club just to get the concentrates, and they're through the roof on just a gram. So I can't remember what the prices are, but usually around here it's pretty low.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just recommend you stay in touch with your state legislators and urge them to respect medical marijuana patients' rights up there, and engage in the political process.
The group in Washington that's doing a lot of good work looking after patients at the state legislature is Americans for Safe Access. Carrie Boyder is really carrying a lot of the load there,
Yeah.
and she's doing good work. Also, Don Skacke is a guy who I know you all know, and he's very involved up there as well.
Don is a dedicated activist. I tell you, if anybody can get the message out about what's going on and can get a lot of people rallied together and get a lot of people excited, it's Don. I tell you, he is 24/7.
He's a good guy.
Activist. He really does rock.
We have a question from the internet for those of you out there. If you want your friends to watch around the country or the world, they can tune in at ustream.tv and watch this show live, or they can tune in and watch it on YouTube the next day. We have a question from Scott at Herbage Designs. He says, when can cannabis businesses start working with banks? I can answer that right now. M-Bank, they only have 3 branches. They're accepting cannabis businesses. They have a vetting process. They don't just open the accounts automatically, but they are accepting cannabis businesses. They were talking about expanding into Colorado, but pulled back from that. So M-Bank, formerly Merchants Bank, is accepting cannabis businesses. They didn't have the infrastructure in Colorado to take deposits.
Oh, so it wasn't.
They only have 3 branches in Oregon.
It wasn't because of any kind of regulations or fears?
No, it was because they didn't have the infrastructure in place.
There's a bank in Salem called MAPS. It's Marion and Polk County School Credit Union. And they're also accepting deposits from.
Cool.
All right. Probably more in the near future. We have a studio audience member who has a question. Go right ahead, Judy.
Hey, guys. A question for all of you, but especially because Leland's here. The Joint Committee. Is the Joint Committee the real powerhouse in terms of, what's going on down there in Salem? I mean, as an activist, with let's just say limited ability to participate, but a great desire to be effective. Look at these things. So the Joint Committee. So I read about the Joint Committee. You've mentioned the Joint Committee. Do they just vet what the other committees are bringing forward? Yeah, and deciding what then will go from there, or are things originating out of them?
That's a good question. It's more of the latter. It's the Senate President and the Speaker of the House form the Joint Committee, and when bills are filed that have to do with implementing 91, that's where they go. There's a couple areas we're pretty sure that they're going to be working on. One is edibles. One is they're at least going to have hearings on DUI. I want to talk about that in just a second.
Well, we only have 7 minutes, so I suggest you talk about it now, briefly as you can.
It's not just legalize and announce. It's legalize and announce. It's leaving the DUI law alone and leaving the Medical Marijuana Act alone. That's what 91 is about.
And that's a good name for it, the Joint Committee.
So yeah, that's where the bills originate. You can follow their agendas is online. Like your show, Paul, they videotape it, and it's archived, and you can get to it on their website.
We have a couple callers standing by. Let's go ahead and take a call. Welcome to the show, caller. Tell them we need to turn the sound up in the studio a little bit. Go right ahead again, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, my question is that counties like Columbia County have banned dispensaries.
Yeah, don't listen. There's a delay on the television, so don't listen to yourself on TV.
And I'm wanting to know, after this is all done and said in June, what is the chances we can get to Columbia County and other counties that are trying to block this more online?
Well, there's a new process under Measure 91, as we were discussing earlier. Do you want to address that, Lee?
Yeah, the counties have to have an election. I want to tell you something. I still represent people statewide. I get to a lot of places. And not since 1998, when we had the Medical Marijuana Act, have I seen a greater disconnect between the people and their elected officials municipally. It's, in municipalities, cities where they voted 491 medical is banned, or there's a tax on medical, or there's a prohibitive tax on adult use. It's the elected officials at the local level, emboldened by the League of Cities and the Association of Counties, are just completely out of control. And unless the League of Cities and the Association of Counties are successful in getting that provision that we talked about earlier repealed, that should be the end of that. We'll just have elections, and we'll be able to...
The counties can decide. If they opt out, they don't get the revenue for their county.
That's right. We wrote in a lot of good incentives to not opt out. That's true, Paul, for the funding.
And then they banned it. So I'm, kind of wondering what's going on.
Well, there's a lot of litigation around whether or not they can ban or not. That's what I mentioned about that earlier, caller. There's a case out of Josephine County that's on its way to the Court of Appeals. And I think that, as Paul and I have been saying, that we're hopeful that this provision in 91 will put a stop to that. And it will, unless the legislature changes it, which, as you saw on the clip, on the news story, that the League of Cities, Association of Counties is trying to do.
We're down to just about 4.5 minutes left to go here.
Very nice. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks for your call. Casper, you want to tell our audience about your radio network?
Time for hemp.com. Make it a point to tune in with all your friends. We have a growing team of people who are dedicated to ending prohibition, that are getting the voice out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have an Android app you can find at the Google Store, and be sure to share us with your friends. And thank you for the shameless plug.
Lee, you want to tell our audience about your practice and what you're doing, and then if someone wants to reach you, how they would do that?
Thanks, Paul. So about a year ago, I started up an LLC called Oregon Cannabis Compliance Council. We're located just down the street here, 2613 Northeast MLK. Our office number is 503-432-8775. I was a criminal lawyer for 30 years. Didn't wake up one day thinking I could advise about businesses, formation, or intellectual property. So I've associated with other lawyers, Cole Haver here in Portland on business formation, intellectual property statewide. Robert Graham in Grants Pass, who does business formation there, and securities law statewide about if you're raising money for your business. A property rights activist named Ross Day is associated with our firm. He's helping on these zoning issues. And then the goddess of hemp, who I know you had on your show last week, Courtney Moran, is an associate attorney on the hemp issues. So,
all right. And so what's that number again if somebody wants to call?
Sure, it's 503-432-8775. We're on Facebook. We have a webpage there. And we do also have a webpage, www.oregonc3.com. It's not up yet, but you can contact us through Facebook or through the phone, or my email's lelandberger@comcast.net.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Lee. We'll have to have you back sometime here in the near future. We still are helping patients all across the country with THCF medical clinics. If you know someone anywhere in the U.S. of A. that needs help finding a doctor that can help them get their state certification for medical marijuana, call that number there on your screen. It's 1-800-723-0188. Or here in Portland, call 503-281-5100. We will be back with another exciting show next week. We're going to go out with another song with a couple of John Trudell's Bad Dogs. We have Quilt Man and Mark Shark and Quilt Son T ready to tee up. Tune in next week and help us restore hemp.